Podcast, episode 33, April 30th, 2019. Welcome to Between the Brackets. I'm Yaron Koren, and this is another BTB Digest. This one is number 5. BTB Digest is the highlights episode of Between the Brackets for the busy Mediawiki enthusiast on the go. I know there are a lot of podcasts out there to listen to and only so much time in the day, so if you want to just hear the highlights, that's what these digest episodes are for. And actually, even if you've heard the episodes already, these are a nice refresher even for me. There's a lot of content in each of these episodes, so it's easy to forget certain parts of the entire thing, so this is a good way to catch up on the highlights. First up was Denny Vrandečić back in January. Denny is the co-creator of Semantic Mediawiki, main creator of Wikidata, and now works on the Google Knowledge Graph, so as you could expect, we had a lot to talk about. By the way, I just saw him recently at the Enterprise Mediawiki conference in Daly City, California, EMWCon, where he was the keynote speaker. In our episode of the podcast, Denny and I talked a lot about Wikidata and about a project he's working on that could end up being even bigger than Wikidata in its own way. A project to create Wikipedia articles in a universal language encoding system that can then be automatically translated into every language, so that languages that never had more than a few thousand articles could now potentially have millions. Anyway, I encourage anyone who's interested in hearing about all that to listen to the episode. For this clip show, I picked something that's maybe more relevant to people looking to hear about Mediawiki. I asked Denny about the use of Wikibase, the set of Mediawiki extensions that power Wikidata outside of Wikidata. It's something that's gotten a lot of publicity, though I think it's almost always a bad idea. I tried to get Denny to agree with me and say, yes, Wikibase is really only good for Wikidata, and everyone else should be using Semantic Mediawiki or Cargo. He wouldn't take the bait, though, and instead offered a more measured response.
So, yes, there are definitely use cases where Cargo or Semantic Mediawiki are better usable than Wikibase. There's no question about that. I actually think that the use cases that are currently being targeted are pretty good use cases for Wikibase. So particularly within the cultural memory organization, within GLAM, I think Wikibase makes a lot of sense because of its very good support of references, of very good support of qualifiers and so on, which is something that seems to be important for that area. So for many GLAM use cases and for scientific use cases, like collecting genetic data, for example, and so on, I think Wikibase is a pretty good candidate. For other use cases, especially, for example, for internal knowledge management, I would very much recommend to use something like Semantic Mediawiki or Cargo instead. But it really depends on the use case. It depends what kind of support you can offer for that project. None of those projects, none of these softwares are intuitive, just drop down and everything will get magically better, right? All of these require that you work with the community that you want to set up. All of these require a community to actually use it. All of these require that you accompany the creation of that project within your organization. And there it really depends on many factors, which of those are better and worse for the given use case. So I think it's complicated, and it's good to have those different tools in the mix. And I do agree with one thing, that whoever chooses those projects should be aware of the alternatives and of their different trade-offs. So that's something where you can find easy agreement with me. So it would be great to have a widely visible article on comparing them, on discussing their weaknesses and strengths, and where they are better than the other.
After Denny, I talked to Megan Cutrofello, who runs the League of Legends esports wiki at Gamepedia. This episode was actually hard to decide on clips for because we covered a lot of different topics, most of them pretty quickly. So instead of cutting up 30-second clips about different topics and trying to introduce them one by one, here's a 5-minute clip where we talk about a bunch of interesting things. the Mediawiki extensions Cargo, Scribunto, page forms, widgets, and gadgets, the programming languages JavaScript, Lua, Visual Basic for Applications, or VBA, and Python, the seemingly endless nature of maintaining a wiki, and what she's working on now. It's really cool to look at the way you've set things up on Wikipedia, actually. I really think the combination of Lua and Cargo, and I guess you can add page forms in there, might as well, is a really strong formula, and I wouldn't be surprised if it gets used a lot more in the future.
Yeah, so I would actually also add widgets and gadgets to that.
Oh, okay.
So like the banner along the top of the wiki, that's loaded every time with a parse query. So that's a gadget. And then I have a couple of pages where I've done widgets where it'll filter results if you click boxes. And I also set up an email subscription based on your watch list that you can set up using a widget.
Oh, cool. Wow. Man. Yeah, okay. Yeah, you've been doing a lot of JavaScript. Yeah, widgets and gadgets are two other extensions that also let you write scripts, although for both of those they're usually JavaScript based. So it's client side as opposed to server side. Just explaining for anyone who's wondering about all this stuff. So it's actually interesting that you mentioned Excel before, because when I look at the combination of Lua and Cargo on your wiki and in other places, it reminds me of Visual Basic macros in Excel, if you know about those, where Cargo sort of functions like the data in spreadsheets, and then the Lua modules are sort of like the macros where you can do whatever custom thing needs to be done.
Yeah, I did very, very little VBA, but that's actually a pretty good comparison, yeah.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So, is there a light at the end of the tunnel for all this work you're doing, or does it seem like the work will never really be done?
So I have like this Trello board, and it has maybe 4 columns of like long-term projects, and then it has like a column of short-term things, and the short-term things like always has a pretty long list, but then there's also these like long-term columns. So I guess the light at the end of the tunnel is that I really like what I do, and so working on all of these long-term things is like something that I'm looking forward to. But I don't really see any point where I'm like, all right, I'm done with this wiki, time to do something else. I think there's always going to be something where it's like, all right, there's still this thing that I can improve, and I'm still like going back and writing code so I guess most of what I've done for the past year is redo code that was there before me, but I'm also starting to rewrite code that I wrote at the beginning of 2018, where I'm like, I didn't know what I was doing well enough yet. I have to redo this, and I'm sure that cycle will never, ever, ever end.
Yeah. Well, hopefully you won't, look back on the code that you're writing now with embarrassment. Hopefully you've reached some kind of, plateau, I would think.
So our off season runs from November to January, and so the season is just starting again now. And my project for this off season was to basically write an entire backend for tournament match and game results, to have a single input place for that, and then have it display on tournament pages with a bunch of different visualizations, all from that single consistent source.
Oh wow!
So we have data pages. We have a data namespace and data pages where you save data. So I've had to do a bunch of. That was a huge project with Cargo and Lua. And then I've also had to write a bunch of Python to convert our old data to the new data format. That's a combination of manual work and Python, because everything is somewhat different. So with the conclusion of this project, hopefully this is good.
In the next episode, I talked to Barry Grenon, my boss at Genesis. By the way, he was also there at the recent EMWCon, as was Megan. Actually, by my count, 9 of the people there at EMWCon have been on this podcast already. I'm not sure if that means I'm making good picks or if I need to expand my horizons more, but anyway, interesting factoid. So here's Barry talking about how the cargo extension can be used to turn Mediawiki into what they call a headless CMS, an application where the content is stored separately from the display of it.
It's very much publishing, like a push publishing type of scenario, which is different than the headless CMS type of scenario where you're pulling content via API call. And that's why we were interested in Contentful. And as it turns out, we didn't realize this, but Cargo API allows for that kind of thing as well. So that's something that's starting to happen in our company a little bit right now with that use case project we were talking about earlier. We have all this important company information that's written by subject matter experts that aren't part of the technical writing team. So we provide support for these authors. They're like product managers and professional support people typically. That content is all stored in Cargo, and then there's other parts of the company that don't use Mediawiki, that aren't connected to our web assets at all, but they want to reuse some of that content, so they can build their own web asset and pull in various fields, whichever ones they need, into their own websites or their own web application using a Cargo API. So that's starting now. So that really supports a strong single source of truth for our content. And it seems like, if looking at the headless CMS model and just the shift towards APIs as a delivery model for software across the board, right?
Yeah.
It seems very flexible. It means that reusing content isn't a matter of a writing team publishing their XML that they own in their own shop to multiple outputs. They then have to control all those outputs. So the writing team or whoever would need to be responsible for all the various output formats. This opens it up so you can be single source of truth to control the data entry, the content entry. We can do a lot to make sure that it's nice, clean, sane content, right? By defining some top level metadata and then have authors select from drop downs and things like that. Right. But then the content's there for any other team to use however they see fit. So the sharing, I anticipate this becoming more so in the future. Sharing of content and content reuse is going to be more between websites as opposed to one team publishing to various websites.
I also asked Barry about the challenges of getting greater adoption of Mediawiki within Genesis.
The challenges for adoption, which haven't been so much for senior management, but just adoption generally, have been wiki markup.
Oh, okay.
Can be a little tricky for people, especially when we want to start doing more elaborate things on a page. And if you want to use more templates to structure content, if you don't have a WYSIWYG in front of that, if you're not using page forms, it gets syntactically denser. So that makes it difficult for adoption generally, I think.
Yeah.
And then the wiki, the fact that the content, we now have the capacity to have highly structured content, but we didn't before. So the fact that your content was a mix of Mediawiki markup and parser function tags that would look like XML to another parser, say, and then HTML. So for doing things like working with translation vendors, for example, that mix of markup is a challenge for working with other, add-on tools, say, that are, part of the technical communication ecosystem of tools, right? So XML is really the most popular way of structuring content, and so there's a lot of add-on companies and vendors and tools and so on that work well with XML. They're just not familiar with Mediawiki syntax. We've had challenges there.
Yeah.
Working with these outside companies, they have to write some custom interpreters to be able to deal with our content, right? So those are some pain points that have been
right
hurt adoption, I guess.
After that was Sam Wilson of Australia. Sam was firmly in the enterprise Mediawiki world, having used both Semantic Mediawiki and Cargo at his job before he joined the Wikimedia Foundation in 2017, so he has a lot of insight into the potential conflicts between the two worlds. Here he is talking about that and making the case for Wikimedia developers to run their own instance of Mediawiki.
I totally think that there is this tension in the Wikimedia Foundation around Mediawiki, and it's sort of is it a open source project that the world uses, or is it the thing that the movement uses to run, Wikipedia and associated sites?
Sure.
I think that is a pretty widely thought about tension, because it's basically it's the tool that we use to run Wikipedia, and so anything we need gets priority. Anything that Wikipedia or the other sites need is the direction that Mediawiki goes in. But I sort of don't feel like there is so much of a tension if you think about Mediawiki as the best possible software for running an encyclopedia. And the definition of encyclopedia can be all sorts of things, and that's why it works for a company intranet, for instance, because that's the same sort of thing. It's the same sort of knowledge management system.
Right.
And so I think, personally, I think more developers working on Mediawiki should run their own, because it does highlight a bunch of things that are sort of lacking, and that don't get prioritized within the foundation. But it's, I don't know, that's probably a pretty long lost cause. I don't think it's now going to go in that direction.
Well, yeah, I agree with you that these two things are not really contradictory. I guess the standard example of something that's much more a much higher priority for outside uses of Mediawiki is access control, of being able to set pages as readable only by some users and have that really stick.
That's true.
Not allow any loopholes.
Well, and I mean, not for read access, but for write access, that's now possible. You can
but write access was
control.
never as big an issue. I mean, if somebody edits something they're not supposed to, it's not the end of the world.
That's true.
Yeah. And of course, extensions like approved revs, as you mentioned, make it so really you never have to prevent anyone from editing anything, really. Maybe.
Yeah. But I think there's been a couple of times maybe when I've been exposed to bugs that haven't come up in the Wikimedia context, but I've found them in my own context. And that's good. I think having, lots of different types of systems running Mediawiki does end up with higher quality software. But, I guess the cost is of more developer time in making things more robust for systems in which you can't control certain dependencies or other contexts like that.
And the final clips for this show come from my interview with Jens Steckhans, who runs the wiki SAPedia, which is the internal wiki used at the large tech company SAP. Here he is talking about the early days of SAPedia back in 2013, when Jens decided that SAP needed a general-purpose encyclopedia, but wasn't sure if he was the one to create it.
Well, first it started as my own, it started bothering me for quite a while. And I thought, I'm not really, I'm an architect here, I'm doing customer projects, it shouldn't be really me. It should be somebody else should be doing that. So I waited and I tried other people to do it, but they weren't willing. And in the end, my frustration got so high that I was thinking, I just started, I'll just do it myself. And there was another thing about it, the lack of accessibility of certain terms was one thing, and the other thing was also language. We have at SAP, we've got an internal search engine where you can find all kind of information, and often you would come across documents, and they were written in what I would say like something like marketing speak, or like or with very many buzzwords in it. Like it would say that, say you look for an explanation of a technology, and it wouldn't explain what the technology is about, but instead it would tell you that it's really disruptive and really innovative, and customers love it, and you should make full leverage of it, etc. And you read all these like paragraph after paragraph, and you still you don't know what it is. So what I was looking for is a place like where you would have like neutral language, like really like an encyclopedia. And that's another thing that I started, and I didn't find that place, so I decided to start it. And it's there's a wonderful culture at SAP of like under the radar projects. Like you give them a certain amount of freedom, and you just do it on your own. And then after a while, you tell your manager, like just so you know, like I'm doing this project here by the side. It won't interfere with my regular work. But just so if anybody asks you what a SAPedia is or whether you've heard about it, just say and you know that I'm doing this. But it won't interfere with my regular job. I'm just doing it on top. Everybody's fine with that. And that's how we started it.
Once the wiki was created, of course, the next step was getting people to use it. And Jens quickly discovered that it wasn't as easy as he thought it might be. So, yeah, what was the initial reaction from other people when you set up a wiki and started populating it?
Well, very different from what I anticipated. I thought I would like set up like a wiki, and I would write everything that I know in it, and like other people would think it's a wonderful idea, and they would start contributing, and it would take off on its own, and everybody would love it, and I would get a promotion and become rich and famous, right? And that was not exactly the case. So the first thing is that most of the people simply ignored it. So that was the initial reaction. And then I thought, okay, so if I really want to this thing to take off, I should probably do some kind of promotion. I should talk about it. So first of all, I started like mentioning to everybody who wanted to hear about it or did not want to hear about it. So like I kept repeating myself to everyone. It got on everybody's nerves. And then I started to inch my way into newsletters. And then I tried to try to promote it internally, and then try out like different venues to do that. And I also started making it more findable. So in the beginning, it was just a server on its own. So I thought, okay, I want people to find it really easily. So we've got this internal search engine. So my first project was to integrate it in there. So if you look for a term in there or any acronym in there, like they should find SAPedia there. So what the first thing.
Right.
And then I thought, it should be very stable. It should be quick. It should be always there, right? And then soon I found out, like an empty wiki, like just like with, 100 entries from me, like it's not that attractive. So I need to give it some bait content. So I started looking for people who had collected their own list of terms and acronyms, and I started convincing them to work with me. And so we we transferred all the content into SAPedia, and then it started growing. And then after a while, we had a few thousand entries, and then it started becoming really useful for people. And they say, oh, you know what? I just stumbled across a platform, it's really useful, and can I contribute to that? Can I enter something? And I say, yeah, please do. And that's how things slowly took off.
SAPedia by now is a much greater success, and I encourage you to listen to the interview with Jens to hear about its current status. And that's it for BTB Digest number 5. I hope you've enjoyed these clips, and I'll see you next time with an all-new guest.